That's a brand new series beginning next weekend. I'm so excited about it. Stories and Songs of the Psalms. We're calling it Songs of the Summer, and I just got to tell you, it is the perfect companion series to this series that we're wrapping up today. But today is the exciting finale of Winning the War in Your Mind, because I got to tell you, the mind is a battlefield, isn't it? I mean, it is just non-stop, all day long, relentless, a battlefield. How many of you would say that over the course of the last few weeks, you've become a little more aware, a little more conscious of that battle that's taking place, maybe a little more conscious of some of those thoughts streaming through your mind and the effect that they have on you? I certainly have been thinking about it like all the time and aware of just this battle. And we've been saying for the whole series that the battle for our, there's that, and then there's that, and then there's that. Yeah, the battle for our lives is fought in our minds. And here's what we mean, that the battle for our lives, the kind of lives we have, the kind of lives we want to have, isn't really fought first out in the public spheres of our lives, in the public spaces. It's fought first and foremost in the private spaces, sometimes the very dark, hidden spaces of our minds. And so we started off this series with the observation that often we think of different aspects of our experience of our inner life as related to different parts of the anatomy, and so people say things like, I don't know, should I use my head? You should follow your heart. Maybe you need to go with your gut. And then it's like, well, which one should I use this time, right? But the truth is, we started off a few weeks ago saying that your brain and your heart and your gut, your logical center of your life, the emotional center, the intuitive center, they're actually all residing in the very same place, the space between our ears. And they're just different words to talk about different aspects or different functions of the brain and of our minds. And so when the writer of Proverbs makes this very famous statement, he says, above all else, guard your heart. Everything you do flows from it. He's talking about your mind. He's talking about that inner experience. In fact, the Hebrew word for heart, lab, it refers to like your entire inner world, your thoughts, your emotions, your passions. And he's saying, you need to guard that. You need to guard that, watch over that, stay on top of that. Be careful about what you put into it. Be careful what you allow to grow in it, what you allow to stay in it, because everything you do actually flows out of your inner experience of life. That is your mind. What fills up our minds flows out in our lives. It is unavoidable. What fills up the mind flows out in our lives. And this brings us to one last principle. It's the fourth principle of our series, and it is a doozy. And like all of the principles we talked about so far, it is based and steeped in not only the wisdom of the ancient scriptures, but also modern scientific discoveries that are really fascinating. And so we've talked about three principles so far in this series, just as a way of review for winning the war on their minds. The first one was called the replacement principle, and the replacement principle is this one: remove the lies, replace with truth. Remove the lies, replace with truth. In other words, capture those negative, toxic thoughts as quickly as you can, spar with them, right? And then, very important, replace them with something better, because I have discovered over the years, it is pretty much impossible to stop thinking a negative, toxic thought by trying hard not to think it. By catching myself and trying to tell myself to stop, I must replace it with a better, healthier, truer alternative. And then we said, because so many of our thoughts become patterns, become habitual or automatic thoughts, the second principle, very important, is the Rewire Principle. Rewire your brain, renew your mind. And this principle applies the replacement principle to our habitual thoughts and patterns. And when I have a habitual repeated thought that's become a script in my mind for years and years, it is not simply enough to try to think a better thought. I need new scripts. I need new scripts, repeated thoughts that we say to ourselves over and over and over again, because what you think becomes easier to think again. And when you think a thought, it becomes easier to think that thought again until that thought begins to think itself. And with the Rewire Principle and the advantage of neuroplasticity in our minds, we are able to actually wire out years old, maybe lifelong old patterns of negative toxic thoughts and wire in better, healthier, truer thoughts. And then last week, this is great. We talked about the Reframe Principle. The Reframe Principle, which applies to our situations and our events and the people and relationships in our lives and how we see them, how we approach them. And the Reframe Principle says, reframe your circumstances, restore your perspective. We cannot choose what happens to us, but we can choose how we frame it. And we're doing this all the time, all day long. We're experiencing things and people, and we're interpreting them through a complex, often conflicting grid of our stories and ideas and experiences from our past and our beliefs that we bring with us into that moment. And here's why this is so important, because our frame determines what we see and how we see it. The way we frame someone or something determines what we'll look for and how we will see it. And when we are in that negative, just toxic mode, angry, resentful, afraid, frantic, the frames we use are invariably negative and toxic and false. They're totally false, but they feel so true at the moment, don't they? It just feels so true. What other explanation could be? Of course, that's what they're trying to do. Let me look at them. What other explanation could there be? It feels so true, but they aren't true. And to reframe means that we take a step back. We calm our brain. If you remember from last week, calm your brain, and we actively choose a different way of seeing that person or that situation. We begin to see them through a more generous, maybe a more grateful, or a more faith-filled, a more redemptive, a more efficacious, if you will. There's a word for you from last week, a more constructive interpretation. I'm going to look at this differently. Now, this week, we add one more principle to our war chest, if you will, the Rejoice Principle. The Rejoice Principle. Now, to get at this, we are once again going to take a look at something written by someone we've looked at throughout this series, a man named Paul. The year is AD 60, and Paul is finally in Rome, though not exactly the way he had expected or hoped to be in Rome. See, he had been arrested about 2.5, maybe 3 years earlier in Jerusalem, and he had gone to Jerusalem actually to give a very large, very generous gift that he had been collecting from all of the churches that he had helped start, these non-Jewish churches, or what they would have called Gentile churches. He wants to give this incredibly generous gift to the poor of the city, and it was an act that he had hoped would be a healing act, that it would be an act that would maybe repair some of the racial and ethnic and historic and religious divides between people. But instead, when he got there, he's arrested almost immediately, and he's been in chains ever since. The trials have dragged on for over 2 years. They're going nowhere. There are repeated threats on his life, and finally, as a Roman citizen, he appeals to Caesar, which means he's going to Rome. And now, after a very life-threatening sea voyage and a shipwreck and almost dying, now he's finally in Rome, but he's under house arrest. He's not a free man. He's chained all day to a Roman soldier, which might be a little better than some of the prisons he's found himself in the past. But he's not free. Let me ask you this. Anybody during the last year have to quarantine for like a couple of weeks? Something happened, you had to quarantine. For 2 weeks, you couldn't do anything. Did you get a little stir crazy? Anybody get a little stir crazy sitting there for 2 weeks? Yeah. Imagine being quarantined for 2 years without Netflix or Postmates, chained to a guard every single day. He's an active guy. He can't go anywhere. You know it's got to drive him a little crazy. And while he's there, he writes a letter to the Jesus community, or the church, or they called it the ecclesia of the Roman colony of Philippi. And here's what he writes about his experience. He says this, Romans 1:12-13. He says, "Now I want you to know, brothers and sisters, that what has happened to me really sucks. As a result of the hell I've been through, I'm quitting life group and I'm never going back to church." That's not what he writes. I've seen people write that before. Heard people say that before, and it would be easy and so understandable for him to see everything that's happening through a very, very negative lens. But instead, he writes in this moment one of the most powerfully positive documents to actually come out of the first century world, a document that's all about joy. And you can see his frame as he writes this words. Here's what he actually writes in chapter 1. He says, now I want you to know, brothers and sisters, that what has happened to me has actually served to advance the good news, which is how they referred to the story and message of Jesus the Messiah. They called it the good news. In fact, he says, as a result, it's become clear throughout the whole palace guards, like Caesar's guard. You go, oh, wait a minute, Paul. That sounds like an exaggeration. How does the whole palace guard know that you are in chains for Christ? And here's where it gets interesting. Because he had appealed to Caesar, he's Caesar's prisoner, which means Caesar's responsible for protecting him, which means all day long the Roman soldier that he's chained to is one of Caesar's. All day long, 8-hour shifts at a time. And guess what Paul talks about? For 8 hours a day, he talks about the Messiah, why he's there. He's got, think about that. He's got a captive audience. And you start to wonder, hey, wait a minute. Who's really the prisoner here in this scenario? Who's chained to who? And then he goes on to say, it's actually, this experience has actually fired up others in the city of Rome to talk about Christ more boldly. And then he goes, yeah, there are some who are taking advantage of the situation to try to create some problems for me. But then he goes, but what does it matter? Hey, the important thing is that in every way, whether from false motives or true, people are talking about Christ, the Messiah. And because of this, I rejoice and I will continue to rejoice. Now that's a frame, isn't it? That's cognitive reframing at its best. It's intentional and it's a choice. It's a frame that he had formed over years and years and years of facing very, very difficult times through a resolved reaction of joy. Not, by the way, shiny, happy people joy or plastic Christian smiley face joy, but a resolved, determined, defiant reaction to praise, to be grateful, and to prayer. And so, as he ends his letter, he passes this on to them, knowing that they're suffering too. He writes about that earlier in the letter. And here's what he says towards the end. We kind of glanced through this a few weeks ago in our series. Here's what he says towards the end. He says, rejoice in the Lord always. Always meaning as a matter of habit. Build this as a matter of habit, a matter of continued repetition in your life, as an automatic thought in every context, good or bad, losses or wins, ups or downs. Choose joy. Choose joy. Choose gratitude. Choose praise, not in your circumstances, because so often our circumstances are not very joyful, are they? It's better than that. You rejoice in something that's always constant. The Lord, meaning because you are connected with Christ, because the rightful Lord of the whole earth loves you, knows you, and is for you. In fact, died for you and rose from the dead to break the dark power's grip of sin and death over your life. You choose that, you lean into that, and you make that your habit. You rejoice. Now, I just got to wonder, as they read this, if their minds don't go back to how they all first met Paul. See, he had come to their proud Roman city about 10 years earlier with his buddy Silas. Paul, this brilliant mind who knew the Hebrew scriptures backwards and forwards, trained as a rabbi under Gamaliel, telling the story of God over and over again in a way that made it so obvious and so clear that the Messiah, the one to whom all authority and dominion and heaven and earth was to be given, had actually come and been rejected and crucified. But it was so clear he had to be. That's actually where the story had pointed all along. We just hadn't seen it. And more than that, had risen from the dead. And he, this Jesus, the Messiah, not Caesar, by the way, is now the rightful Lord of the whole earth. And it was so amazing. And Lydia, this powerful woman, this wealthy and strong woman, was the first to believe. And the ecclesia, the Jesus community, begins to meet in her very large home. Then others came. And then something happened. Paul delivered this slave girl from a spiritual oppression, and her owners, who had been making money off of her dark gift for years, flew into a rage. They dragged Paul and his brilliant friend Silas to the city authorities, exposing what they called all of their un-Roman, or actually anti-Roman practices and their potentially seditious things that they were saying and doing. And suddenly the whole city's in an uproar. There's a riot, and Paul and Silas are stripped naked, beaten severely, and then tossed naked and bloody into the innermost, darkest cell in the dungeon, no doubt to be executed the next day. But that's not how the story ended. Fastened to stocks, bleeding, every inch of their body screaming with pain, unable to sleep, middle of the night, Paul and Silas begin singing, praying and singing hymns, no doubt singing the Psalms. The Psalms, these great songs that they'd grown up memorizing about the greatness and the goodness and the power and the faithfulness of God in the face of our enemies, in the face of tragedy and difficulty. Maybe they begin with Psalm 57. Have mercy on me, my God. Have mercy on me, for in you I take refuge. I will take refuge in the shadow of your wings until the disaster has passed. I cry out to God Most High, to God who vindicates me. He sends from heaven and saves me, rebuking those who hotly pursue me. God sends forth his love and his faithfulness. Be exalted, O God, above the heavens. Let your glory be over all the earth. My heart, O God, is steadfast. My heart is steadfast. I will sing and make music. I will praise you, Lord, among the nations. Or they would have said the Gentiles, like all of these prisoners who are listening in right now in this Roman colony of Philippi. And I will sing to you among the peoples, for great is your love. Reaching to the heavens, and your faithfulness reaches to the skies. And then maybe they jump over to Psalm 40. I waited patiently for the Lord. He turned to me and heard my cry. He lifted me out of the slimy pit, out of the mud and mire, and he set my feet on a rock. And he gave me a firm place to stand, and he put a new song in my mouth, a hymn of praise to our God. Many will see, including all of you who are listening in right now, and revere the Lord and put their trust in him. Many, Lord my God, are the wonders you have done, the things that you have planned for us. None can compare with you. Were I to speak and tell of your deeds, they would be too many to declare. And then maybe over to Psalm 46, and then of course Psalm 23, and then they've got to sing Psalm 2, one of the most famous and more popular psalms to the early Christians. So many psalms, on and on and on it goes, into the night, when suddenly a terrible earthquake. The doors are shaken loose from the prison. Chains are ripped out of the walls, but no one runs. No one actually escapes. And the jailer, who's a former Roman soldier, rushes in. He assumes all the prisoners have escaped. And so he's going to kill himself to save the shame of having his superiors do it to him, when Paul sees him through the dust and screams out, "Hey, don't do it, man. We're all here." And the jailer is blown away, and the guards and the soldiers are blown away, and the prisoners are blown away, and people are baptized that very night. And the ecclesia, the Jesus community in Philippi, grows with the strangest combination of people you might imagine. And 10 years later, I picture them sitting in Lydia's home, listening to this letter as it's being read. Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I will say to you, rejoice. And they know he means it. They know he means it, and they know it's possible. They know it's possible to choose that frame. And as it turns out, this here is incredibly good advice. Research tells us that happiness helps the brain think with more flexibility, more creativity, more complexity. In fact, Harvard's Sean Aker, in his great book, The Happiness Advantage, and the TED Talk that he's very famous for by the same title, in his research, they have shown that your brain at positive is 31% more productive than at negative, neutral, or stressed. I'll say that again. Your brain at positive is 31% more productive than your brain at negative or neutral or stress. That joy actually increases or releases endorphins, which ignites the brain's ability to think creatively, intelligence rises, energies level rise, focus is clearer and stronger, the ability of the brain to make connections and foresee consequences and problem solve, and therefore, regardless of whatever it is you're going through, in every situation, in all circumstances, especially maybe the difficult ones, whatever the adversity, whatever the crisis, whatever conflict, maybe especially because of that, because isn't it true? The more difficult this relationship is right now, the more difficult this person is to get along with, the more difficult this challenge financially or in your physical health or so, that situation is, isn't it true? The more you need your brain to be at its best, the more you need to be thinking clearly, the more you need the ability to be creative or to focus. Of course you do, right? And Paul says, listen, choose joy. And then he says this is so good. He says, and I have a blank there. I have a blank on in the notes and the outlines as well, because this word is translated a lot of different ways. Paul is actually writing in ancient Greek. That's what everyone would have read in his day. We translate it into English. And the next word is sometimes translated like gentleness or forbearance. He actually uses the Greek word epiekes. And epiekes is one of these rare words, according to New Testament scholars, that's kind of hard to translate because it has no one-to-one correlation in our language, in English. And so it means things like forbearance, or I love this word, magnanimity, but it's not a very common word in the English language. So I think maybe the best word is reasonableness. Let your reasonableness, the word has this general sense of meeting somebody halfway, of giving people the benefit of the doubt, of being open to what they might have to say. It describes, in some Greek literature, the person who doesn't have to be right, even when they're actually right. How hard is that? Doesn't have to be right, even when they actually are, and they're able to just let something play out. Reasonableness. And he says, this quality is so essential for you. It should be obvious to everybody. It should be evident to all. Reasonableness, in other words, is what everybody should see when they look at you or at us. Now, can you imagine that? I mean, can you just for a moment imagine that? I mean, we are such a polarized society right now, right? Politics and the planet, ecology, the economy, immigration, race, masks, vaccines. It just goes on and on. So polarized. Can you imagine what it would be like if when people thought of Christians, or when people thought of the church, even if they did not believe what we believed, the word that came to their mind was, man, those guys are just so reasonable. They're just so reasonable. I mean, you can talk about the messiest, most complex things with them, and they're just reasonable. Is that what people think when they think about you? Is that what people think when they think about me? Is that, over this past year, what people have thought when they thought about the church? Let your epiekes, let your reasonableness, let your magnanimity just be what everybody sees. And of course, epiekes comes way more easily to a joyful mind than to a frightened, threatened mind, which might be why he says next, the Lord is near. Which isn't a threat, by the way. It's a quote from Psalm 145. Psalm 145 says this, the Lord is righteous in all his ways. He is faithful in all he does. The Lord is near to all who call upon him in truth. He fulfills the desires of those who revere him. He hears their cry and saves them. And I find it so interesting, as you're reading through Paul's letter, how often he's quoting the Psalms, how often he's riffing the Psalms, one line here, another line there, like he's got them all memorized, which he most certainly did. And I wonder if he had actually been reflecting on this Psalm that very day. As he was writing that letter, as he was chained to that Roman guard, the Lord is near. He's righteous in all his ways, faithful in all he does, and he's near to those who call on him. To those who call on him in truth, he fulfills the desires of those who revere him. He hears their cries and he saves them. He's right here with me and he's right here with you. He's near to you when you call on him, even in this crisis, even in this challenge, even when you're walking through the valley of the shadow of death. So he says, do not be anxious about anything. Now that English word anxious translates the Greek word merimnete. And merimnete means, well, it means anxious, but it's actually a bit of a broader word than our English word. It includes kind of any type of overthinking, just any type of churning. Anybody found themselves churning about something this week, just mentally going over something, overthinking it, troubled, worked up, afraid, anxious, obsessing a little bit, paranoid, stressed, frantic, frazzled. It's just all the ways that we allow ourselves to get caught in a vicious vortex of an emotional undertow and get dumb. That's right. It turns out the joy and happiness makes you smarter, and fear and anxiety make you dumb. Dumb. In fact, a lot dumber. Brain researchers describe this in a lot of ways, but it's kind of like a switch gets flipped in our brains. A switch flips from the upper brain to the lower brain. Now, the upper brain is where all of the higher capacities live. That's where logic and judgment and creativity and forward thinking and working memory and planning and big picture and problem solving, empathy. In other words, all the good stuff. That's the good stuff. That's the stuff that you want to have when you're facing an actual challenge or a conflict with somebody or problem, right? That's the good stuff. But the lower brain is what's considered instinctive and reactive. In fact, it's often called the lizard brain. The lizard brain. There's not a whole lot of thinking that goes on in the lizard brain. Lizards are not smart. And when you're in lower brain mode, what happens is your limbic system, and particularly your amygdala, dumps, with the hypothalamus, dumps a cocktail of stress hormones and adrenaline into your bloodstream, increasing heart rate, increasing blood sugar, shutting down the cognitive functions so you don't overthink anything, and then dilating the pupils, sending blood to the muscles. In other words, it's fight or flight, or as I often say, fight, flight, or fright, which is really good if you're actually fighting or flighting. But most of the time, we're doing nothing, neither of those. We're just frighting. And if you're not fighting or flighting, that is really bad. Lower brain mode and those stress hormones is terrible for you. Physically, your physical health, and for your brain. It actually causes brain damage. And we say things like, man, I just can't think straight. You ever say that? I just can't think straight. I just keep forgetting. I can't seem to focus. I don't know what to do. I can't make a decision. Anxiety, merimnete, makes us dumb. And Paul says, don't do that. Don't give the lizard the keys to the car. You can't afford to be stupid when you really need to be smart. So don't let yourself get trapped or caught in that undertow. But in every situation, instead he's saying the alternative to the vicious vortex, because the Lord is near to all who call on his name, in every situation, by prayer and petition, present your requests to God. Be anxious about nothing, pray about everything. He says it like it's so simple. Capture those thoughts, spar with them, and he says, turn your concerns into two things. First, prayer. Prayer, which immediately engages a positive upward spiral. Prayer and petition, and I love the language, presenting your requests to God. Just presenting, laying them open to God, your needs to God, because here's what we all know is true. There are things I can do, and I must do them. They're in my sphere of responsibility to do, and I must do what I can do, the things that have been given to me to do, but there are a lot of things I cannot do, and I must release them. I have to release them. And in every situation, there's both. But anxiety stifles my capacity to see that. The perspective I need for what I can do and what I can't do. And consequently, I spend all of my energy fretting over what I cannot do while dropping the ball on what I can. And that is dumb. That's not super smart. And positive prayer, it turns out, as we're going to see in a second, is one of the most powerful ways to sift through the situation I am and find the difference between those two things and release what I cannot do to God. But that's actually not exactly what he said. He didn't actually say this. That's mostly what he said, but right in the middle of that, he adds an insight that's huge. What he actually says is, in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, with gratitude, present your request to God. In other words, capture those anxious thoughts, spar with them, and you turn them into two things: prayer and gratitude. And you think of things to be thankful for, which is not easy to do when I'm in lizard brain mode. You think of things to be grateful for in this moment. You think about things about that other person that you can be grateful for, and you express gratitude. Now, this is genius. This right here is genius because studies have shown again and again that one of the most powerful mood lifters and anxiety busters there is to think of things that you are grateful for and either write it or say it out loud. To think of things that you're grateful for and either write it or say it. And in study after study after study, subjects who've daily written down 5 things that they're grateful for, every day writing down 5 things that they're grateful for, over time show significantly higher and sustained levels of happiness and well-being. He says, rejoice in the Lord, friends. In fact, I'll say it to you again. Rejoice. Hey, let your reasonableness be what everybody sees when they look at you. Lord is near to all who call on him. So do not be anxious about anything, but in prayer and petition with gratitude filling your hearts, present your requests to God. And he says, and if you will do that, here's what will happen next. And the peace of God. The peace of God, in fact, peace of God that transcends all understanding, and it doesn't even make sense how you have so much peace, will guard your hearts and your minds. It's interesting. He actually uses a military term here. This term for guarding, as he's chained to a soldier who's guarding him, that the peace of God will watch over you like that and will protect your heart and your mind, your thoughts and your emotions. Now, it turns out this is actually true. As a number of very famous studies have recently shown, prayer actually changes your brain. Prayer actually changes your brain, not just the chemistry of your brain, but its actual physiology. It changes your brain physically. Studies have shown that 12 minutes a day of active or positive prayer, meditation, thoughtful communion with God, 12 minutes a day of active prayer results in changes in the brain that can actually be measured on brain scans. They can actually see it happen with two surprising results. The first is that there is measurable growth both in activity and actual volume and size of a part of your brain called the cingulate cortex, which is part of the limbic system, part of that lower brain. But the cingulate cortex is actually where we experience love and compassion and care and pity and empathy. It's what we refer to when we talk about our heart. Man, it just really moved my heart. I mean, my heart just goes out to them. Boy, they're really pulling on my heartstrings. Actually, what they're pulling on is the strings of your cingulate cortex. That's where you are experiencing all of that empathy or that compassion. And 12 minutes a day of active prayer actually grows that part of your brain and increases its activity. And at the same time, they use the word downregulate. It calms that amygdala. That amygdala and the hypothalamus that are dumping those cocktails of stress hormones, that fight or flight, fright mechanisms, all of those alarm systems just going off in your brain, freaking you out. That prayer not only grows your cingulate cortex, but it calms your amygdala. And it calms your hypothalamus. And as a result, fear and anxiety diminish. So love and empathy are increased. Fear and anxiety are diminished. Or as Paul would say, man, the peace of God that transcends all understanding will guard and protect your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. It's the Rejoice Principle. The Rejoice Principle is refocus your mind, revive your soul. Refocus your mind, revive your soul. And by the way, as a shameless plug, I don't know any better way to do that than the things we're going to be talking about in this next series. And we're not just going to talk about the Psalms. We've got a reading list to take you through them. We're just going to deep dive in these wonderful songs and stories. But this week, here's what I know. There will be a war in your mind. And there will be a war in my mind. You will become anxious, stressed, worked up, obsessing over some person or some situation in your life. It's predictable, isn't it? But this week, you're going to think about this passage. Maybe you're going to write it down and carry it with you. Maybe you're going to stick it on your desk or your computer screen or on your refrigerator or maybe your mirror in your bathroom. And then you're going to think about this passage and you're going to think about your brain. And this week you're going to go, wait a minute. I am letting my amygdala hijack my brain. I'm giving the lizard the keys to the car. That's dumb. I don't need to be dumb and reactive right now. I need to be smart. I need to be in my right mind. This demands good thought. And so God, I'm going to choose to rejoice. I'm going to choose that. I'm going to choose prayer and gratitude and praise. I'm going to find reasons for gratitude, and I'm going to trust that you are near to me because you are near to all who call on your name, and that you know me, and that you love me, and that you are for me. And because of that, I can do what you have given me to do, and I'm going to do it. And I'm going to trust you with everything that I can't. Can you imagine? Can you imagine a heart at peace? A life of joy, a mind filled with courage and hope instead of anxiety? It's possible. It's possible. It's possible, and it's a choice. So back to our very first week. If your life is always moving in the direction of your strongest thoughts, do you like the direction your thoughts have been taking you? If your life is always moving in the direction of your strongest thoughts, do you like the direction your thoughts are taking you? And I got to tell you, I did not like that direction last year. Did you? Are you liking the direction your thoughts are taking you now? But here's the thing, I have a choice. And you have a choice, and we can learn how to direct our thoughts and to think new thoughts. This is a point on which Scripture and science are in 100% agreement. So what will we do? What will we do? Let's review. We're going to tear down strongholds with God's power. We are going to take thoughts captive and make them obey Christ. Not just trying to stop them, but actually trying to replace them with truer, more faith-filled, more God-honoring thoughts. And then we're going to take note of the patterns. Those habitual thoughts, maybe lifelong ways of thinking that we've become just anesthetized to. And we're going to take note of some of those patterns, and we're going to write some new scripts. We're going to write some new scripts of faith and courage and hope, and we are going to repeat those scripts over and over again and wire them into our brain, and we're going to become way more conscious of our frames, something that we're often totally unaware of, how we're framing people right now, how we're framing circumstances, including some of the painful circumstances, not only of our present, but even of our past. And when things go wrong and people upset us, last week, what we say, calm your brain, take a step back, clarify the situation. Here's exactly what's happening and what's not happening. Capture those automatic thoughts, and then choose a better, more generous, more faithful, more courageous, more redemptive frame. And then finally, we are going to rejoice. We're going to rejoice. We're going to grab our amygdala, our anxieties by the tail, and we're going to direct them towards God in prayer and gratitude and praise. The series might be over, but for me, I just feel like the battle's just begun. And I thought maybe there wouldn't be a better way to end today, eventually by celebrating communion. But before that, I want the band to lead us in this song that we started learning last week, this song. And as we do so, I would like to invite you, as they join me on stage, to actually stand. So would you all stand with me? Let's stand. And as we end this series, I want to remind us all of what God says is true about us, what's true about you. And here's what he says. You are not a hostage to your negative thoughts. The weapons we fight with are not the weapons of this world. You have God-given power to demolish strongholds, to tear down every idea that sets itself up against you, knowing and experiencing God. Worry is not your master. You trust in God. He is near you, and his peace guards your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. And you can do anything he calls you to do through his power in you. So you will do what you can in his strength, and you will trust him with what you cannot do. You have not been given a spirit of fear or timidity, but a spirit of power and of love and of a sound mind. You are not a slave to your habits. You are not a prisoner to your addictions. You have been rescued from the dominion of darkness and brought into the kingdom of light, the kingdom of his Son whom he loves, and you are not your past. You are not what you did or what was done to you. You are who God says you are, and he says, you're my son, you're my daughter, you are chosen, you are loved, you are redeemed, you are forgiven, and you are free, and nothing can separate you from God's love, neither life nor death, neither success nor failure, nor the present, nor the future, nor any powers in heaven or on earth can separate you from the love of God that is in Christ Jesus our Lord. The battle for your life will be fought and won or lost in your mind every single day. The battle rages, but God has already won the war. The battle rages, but he has won the war. And now we fight in and for the victory that he has already won for us. And so let's join the band as they lead us in this song that we learned last week.
The battle rages, but you have won the war. You see my sin, still you have called me yours. There is no fear now that you haven't conquered. And all these demons, they run at your command. And all my shame falls away in your hands. There is no darkness that you don't shine brighter. Breathe in your peace. Be the calm my fighting soul needs. When I'm weak, you are strong, and you say that I am yours. Fear has no place, and the darkness cannot remain. As you speak over me, and you say I am yours.